what went wrong with We Happy Few? Let's rate it.
Carry.
Okay, get up. Sleep.
Okay. Oh. Okay, I hope that was a glitch and not a scripted moment.
Believe it or not, a lot of people looked forward to this game, but upon its less than favorable unoptimized launch, with a copious amount of bugs,
like the demo was insane, everyone was so hyped, and after that, no one really cared about it.
AAA price tag, controversy with Gearbox, and very mixed reviews, all the hard work in the nearly 5 years of development ultimately met a miserable conclusion. What happened to this game? How did it get to this point? And what is it like today? Well, we're gonna find out because this is What Went Wrong with We Happy Few. I'm Wicked Wiz, being a man of my word and standing inside a Reddit mod's basement for some reason. And before the FBI shows up, I'd like to say a massive thanks to all my new and existing Patreons.
Yeah, go support him. I've watched some of his videos, they were great, and yeah, support him.
You guys help to make these videos sponsorless. We Happy Few is a game set in a fictional city called Wellington Wells, in England, and in the funky form over function 60s. You'll find yourself in a nightmarish dystopian police state where everyone is forced to be unnaturally upbeat and positive every waking moment of their lives, which can only be achieved / enforced via the constant
Yeah, I liked that in the beginning when you didn't took your pills, that the effect kind of were off and you could see more of a real state you were living in, and like that was
consumption of happy pills called joy. These pills warp reality into a joyful utopia while hiding the famine, decay, plague, and the very regrettable, horrible history behind these townsfolk. If you fail to conform by not taking your joy, wearing tattered clothes, or even simply running about, then you'll be considered a wastrel downer, and if you're lucky, you'll be thrown out into what is known as the Garden District, or just die, because that's what actually happens when you play the game. Now, the Garden District is full of downers and disbelievers just like you. These people are either resistant to joy, know too much, or have gone absolutely insane. They hate people that come from that
most of them are just lunatics, like
happy utopia because it reminds them of what they once had. They'll jump you on sight if you look too well dressed, and will label you a tourist. The game has a really cool concept which takes the idea of fitting in to the extreme. It doesn't matter if you're in the parade with all the pill poppers or in the Garden District with all the downers. If you don't fit in with the crowd, you're an outcast, and you'll be punished for it. We Happy Few takes a lot of inspiration from films such as the 1985 dystopian classic Brazil, as well as A Clockwork Orange, Brave
and I know it has some Monty Python elements like
New World, Doctor Who, and even one of my most favorite films ever, Hot Fuzz. The humor in this game is of course largely inspired by Monty Python because it's great and British. In fact, this game, for all of its flaws, did give me a chuckle here and there.
How do I cross that platform without getting electrocuted?
Now make sure there isn't a short circuit
okay,
fucking apprentices. They never fucking listen.
The base game is the main focus of this video here, and I can only describe it as a wannabe roguelike survival with a sort of linear narrative story. If that sounds weird, that's because it is. In the campaign, you play through 3 acts, and with each act you play as 3 different characters. Act 1 has you playing as the pencil-pushing Arthur, who's more of a jack of all trades. Act 2 has
I only know about Arthur, the rest I don't really know anything about the rest of the game.
You playing as the stealthy chemist with a baby called Sally, and Act 3 has you playing as the lovable Scottish tank Ollie, who I managed to beat the game as in a maid's outfit. Anyway, the goal is to escape, but each character uncovers the truth about what's really going on in Wellington Wells. Now, I won't spoil much of the game in this video, but I can tell you for a fact right now that the story is the main thing that got me through it. Not only do you find out what happened after the war, but you uncover the dark truth behind joy. There are stealth mechanics with multiple ways to approach each quest, and combat that's not all too great, but at times is still quite satisfying. For each character, you have
the comment kind of felt generic when I'm being honest.
Somewhat unique skill trees, with some skills being super OP, like this one here that essentially makes you invisible to all officers after curfew, and actually makes one of the end missions laughably easy. There are also crafting mechanics for chemicals, clothes, weapons, and throwables, somewhat redundant survival mechanics such as hunger, thirst, and sleep.
Yeah, but I think this game didn't really needed that survival mechanic. Like it should be purely focused on the story, in my opinion, and the effects of joy on your body, like when you take the drug or not. Like the survival mechanic was completely irrelevant, I think.
Which only gives you a debuff on stamina if you're ever low. Although starving was originally a concept in this game, you just can't starve, no matter how many days it's been. But when you eat food, depending on the quality, you can gain a buff, which is usually quite helpful. Then, of course, there's joy, which comes with its own side effects. If you take too much, you'll overdose. Once you run out, you'll have a come down. And if you take too much over a longer period of time, you get memory loss, which didn't seem to have any long-term effects, at least in my playthrough. And the quests are, well, we'll get into that a little bit later because I've got a lot to say about the questing system in this game. But to understand what went wrong, we first need to take a look at where it all started. Our story with this game begins with a small but passionate Canadian game development company called Compulsion Games, founded all the way back in 2009 by a man named Guillaume Provost. This company had a humble beginning, starting off in Guillaume's house. And from the very beginning, they had plans to make their own games, but in order to achieve this, they also worked on external projects, such as Darksiders and D&D Daggerdale. But still, they managed
who can remember Darksiders? Like, that was part of my childhood,
to work on and release their first ever game called Contrast. It was an interesting film noir style puzzle game set in Paris, where you play as either a little girl or her imaginary friend who can traverse between the Shadow Realm in a 2D platformer experience and 3D environments. But the reviews that came after its release weren't all too positive. Rather mixed, in fact. The style was loved, but the gameplay and repetitive puzzles didn't seem up to par. And this,
like, I think having just a 50%, if it's not positive or negative or just neutral, it's quite a bad thing. Like, if it's like really bad, people are going to talk about it, or if it's really good. But if it's just generic, no one will give a shit. That's a problem.
This wouldn't be the only time Compulsion Games would experience a similar kind of response. All credit to the company though, as they took it on the chin and tried something else. Because shortly after Contrast, they began work on We Happy Few, a concept that was fantasized by Guillaume and the team's interest for both British film and TV. From their experience with Contrast and the limitations, as well as the lack of replayability that typically comes with puzzle games, Compulsion wanted to create something more roguelike, something that you could play multiple times, and something procedural but different to all the other survival games out there. They also
back in the day, everyone wanted to make a survival game, like the typical Hunger first bar. Like it felt so overload. Like not every game needs this.
didn't have much in the way of funding, so making a game like this would be more cost effective. There wasn't much of a story to the game at this point either, although it's clear that they've always wanted to add one. But they decided to hold back on adding any story elements because of the limited resources and because they were quite a small team. However, without a story, the game didn't seem all too scalable. They saw what the competition was doing and how other games had such memorable moments.
Yeah, and they tried to copy it, and that was...
and locations, and that without a story, the game would just be a stylized survival that only runs skin deep. But they still planned the story on the side, and while doing so, they realized that this would completely change the game that they already had. And the fans of this game wouldn't see the story until release. After a couple of years of development, the team at Compulsion had a proof of concept ready to share with members of the public for the first time in February of 2015 at PAX East. They had a pretty small setup, but people still came over to play their demos, and they received a lot of good feedback. Because
yeah, we all remembered that type with the demo, but what it came after that, man.
the art style, people would say it looks something like BioShock or even Dishonored. So you can imagine that by
it kind of gave BioShock vibe. That's
word of mouth, when people compared this indie game to big titles like that, expectations are going to be all over the place. You might think it's weird that I'm bringing up this point, but this legit became an issue for Compulsion. In an interview with Guillaume regarding the comparison to BioShock, he says this: "What the public and the press were telling us they loved about our game wasn't anything like the procedural story, light, roguelike survival game that we were creating at all. We were all excited about developing the story, the world, and the general experience of discovering that world. But I knew full well from my time at Dishonored Studio Arcane that those kind of experiences required a lot more money and a larger veteran team to pull it off.
It's hard.
But they did sort of roll with the BioShock comparison at PAX, as in their own recap on their blog, they said that the simplest explanation we found at PAX, although it's not perfect, is that We Happy Few is Don't Starve meets BioShock. First-person stylized world that is reminiscent of BioShock, with gameplay elements and replayable nature of Don't Starve. Which in a nutshell is saying that although the game looks a bit like BioShock, it really isn't. But little did they know, PAX East would change the game forever. They received first-hand feedback when talking about the potential narrative-driven story. It seemed to be what the players wanted. So with this, Compulsion would pivot, increase the scope, and test the idea of a narrative-driven story with a Kickstarter campaign. So in the next few months, they got to work, planned, prepped, and launched their campaign on the 4th of June 2015. This Kickstarter was an...
Never was a big fan of Kickstarters. Like, most of them are just a scam, and I recommend you not to spend money on these ones. Like, you can't really trust any company who goes on Kickstarters. Like, I would never do that.
Absolute banger, showing proof of concept with gameplay of the pre-alpha, an interview style pitch where we see Uncle Jack, an in-game celebrity plastered on every TV screen, played brilliantly by Julian Casey, where he would interview Guillaume about We Happy Few. The Kickstarter came with a bunch of tiers, 17 to be exact, going up all the way to about 5k in Canadian dollars, with the highest tiers giving you a chance to have your voice in the game, if you're British that is, or you could have the chance to create your own scenario, or send Uncle Jack a letter for him to read in game.
Like those promises, they look at this. They feel like a scam. If you see this in any other game, and any other Kickstarter, this is a huge red flag. Like, man, but
Him to read in game.
No,
people who backed this project for about $60 received access to the pre-alpha as well as a full copy of the game once it's finished. They state in their risks and challenges that they wish to keep a consistent line of communication with backers of the project.
Like, I love how every company says that they want this community focus and that we're gonna talk to each other, but this never really happens.
Hoping that they do community focused development right. This is something that appears to be on point, especially when you look at their blog. They post these weekly updates and have been doing so fairly consistently. I like this. Compulsion so far is doing all the right things with their community. Although
okay,
I can't
that part is great. They're actually pulling that one off, but where did it went wrong?
really say the same for what happens later with Gearbox. Reaching the goal for this Kickstarter was no walk in the park. As with new games being announced, along with E3, the campaign started to stagnate. However, thanks to their community taking note of this, they came together and raised more awareness for the game. On the 4th of July 2015, they eventually surpassed their goal of 250,000 Canadian dollars,
Damn.
with an additional 85k, giving them the ability to add much more to the game. Now, there are quite a few...
But as we learn from every other game is that money doesn't really solve most of all these things. You really need people who know what they are doing, veterans in this field. Like, if you just throw money in it won't make it better. Look at every AAA game, man.
supporters of this project, and hype surrounding
Most of them. Some of them are pretty great, but most of them are pretty generic.
the game attracted Microsoft. Compulsion Games jumped at the opportunity and became a part of the Microsoft ID Xbox program, and later signed a deal where they could release We Happy Few in early access a year later for both Steam and Xbox Preview. This was all well and good. In fact, this was a massive achievement for these indie devs. However, the impression they got from the audience was daunting to say the least. In an interview, Guillaume says this: "It was the reaction of our fans that really drove home how big this game could become. It was also a bit daunting. Getting too much hype is a good problem to have, but it can also backfire. After watching the launch of No Man's Sky that year, we carefully backpedaled some of the hype and managed expectations with regards to the game. There's
solution to learn from that one, but
solution to controlling the hype was transparency. Behind closed doors, you could expect the wildest things. But if you see the journey and the choices made, then people would know what to expect. Or at least, that was the hope. But the issue that Compulsion was dealing with is that people saw this game as a AAA.
I'm sorry, my Discord is annoying.
title, and their choices later on wouldn't really help with any of that. The early access came with the well-known introduction where you have to escape your job after being outed as a downer.
This is one of the few introductions in a game which I can clearly remember, like that one with the rats and that thing.
And hitting this piñata that turned out to be a rat while people just eat its guts, and then you'd be thrown into this open world survival. However, with this early access, there was still no narrative story to follow. Mostly just little side quests to complete that all have their own bit of story to tell. Because of early access and the exposure from E3, the game received ever-growing support from both existing and new fans. But some people felt that the rest of the sandbox experience didn't live up to the first few minutes in the game. Compulsion was aware of this.
Like it overhyped the people. That's
And hoped that the story that they've been working on in the background would make the game more complete and interesting for those who were asking for it. However, with this new success, Compulsion had an internal battle, whether or
like, look at this combat. This looks fucking boring, man.
not to stick with their guns and keep the game relatively small, running the risk of under-delivering on player expectations, or expand and provide even more. Before the Kickstarter campaign, before E3, the team was struggling financially. So with all of this new exposure and of course the additional funding from early access, they now finally have the team and the money to build the game that they've always wanted. So with this confidence, they decided to go all out with the campaign, adding even more than they originally planned.
I think the story element was the best thing about this game, but did they do it well? Because I don't know anything about the story later on.
But things would change shortly after E3 as Gearbox approached Compulsion Games and offered to act as their publisher, saying that this game, or at least its
getting a publisher, is most of the time a bad decision. They fuck up your game, especially game for
potential would have a good shot at retail. At first, Compulsion sort of pushed back. They felt that with the exposure from E3 and all the additional funding, that they could hack it and publish the game themselves. But the leader at the Gearbox publishing team, Steve Gibson, was relentless, flying the team from Compulsion out to Dallas to convince them further. Finally, Compulsion Games took the offer, and after making an announcement about this new partnership on their blog, controversy and speculation from the fans would begin to stew. As with this decision to publish through Gearbox,
just to get a shit ton of money, it was a way of thinking, and you fell right into the trap.
Also came with a massive price change, not just a couple of dollars or more. No, the price doubled from $30 to $60. And all of this happened while the game...
When I saw that this game was that expensive for a sandbox game, survival, that was disgusting, mate. Like, if you see this comment, do you really think that this game is worth $60? Like, the gameplay itself. It's also a huge part, besides the story. So yeah, they made the story core part. But if you just see the gameplay itself, do you really think that this shit is worth $60? I don't think so, man.
Game was still in early access. There was also the mention of the much dreaded season pass. They did have a 15%
season pass? Are you kidding me?
Discount, but still, an early access game at $50 is hefty to say the least.
The screen screed, man.
On the 21st of August 2017, a Steam post from a developer at Compulsion Games gave this reason for the price increase. We have no alternative. As the game is coming to retail, the price must be consistent across all platforms. The early access is effectively a pre-order at this point, except you can play the early access version of the game. And in September, in a follow-up post, they go on
Many early access games are just pure scam. Except for one, The Forest. This is one of my favorite titles, most favorite titles. Like, they truly put effort into the game to create that horror feeling. But that doesn't matter with Visitor. Let's go.
And say, when we launched in early access...
I don't want to go on with too long tangents. Like, someone mentioned it in an earlier video that's kind of annoying. And I think I should adapt to that, I guess.
We were aiming for a full launch price of $40. However, as we absorbed early feedback, we realized that we would need to reinvest and grow the project accordingly. From a strategic standpoint, raising the price to $60 and bringing the game to retail was the path most likely to lead us to recouping our increased investment and hopefully funding development of our next major project. Fair enough, they want to make a return on investment. But the issue here was there was no real difference between buying the early access now at a higher price compared to buying it at $30. The only pre-order benefit that I could find for the standard version was that you get a Jolly Brolly, which is probably the funniest slap in the face I've seen for a pre-order.
This is just they spit at you, man. Imagine supporting this game for years and they do something like that, man. Like this, what I said, fucking Kickstarters, man.
Basically, person A who bought the game in early access for $30 or more would still have the same experience on release as person B who now has to buy it for $60 or should I say $50 with the 15% discount. Now the backlash wasn't just about the price change, it was the fact that Compulsion Games seemed to be putting none of the blame on Gearbox, or at least trying to cover it up, saying that it wasn't really down to working with Gearbox, which of course is true because they made the decision. However, I can't help but think that Gearbox at least swayed them towards this retail direction. Because in the same Steam post in September, responding to comments of them selling out, they said this: "We understand how passionate gamers can be. We're passionate gamers ourselves, and we respect that you might have opinions that differ with our own. We are Compulsion Games, makers of We Happy Few, a game that would have released digitally solely on Xbox One and PC had it not been for the partnership that would effectively bring the game."
Yeah, why did you do the partnership, man? Fucking money. Most are greedy bastards, man. Fuck off. Like this is complete BS. They saw that they would get a lot of money from their publisher, and they just accepted that shit instead of creating a good game for fuck shit. Look, this is. But they say they are true gamers themselves. No, they are not. This is just an insane lie. If I see this shit here, right here.
To PS4 and retail locations
This is
across
disgusting.
the globe. We didn't sell anything, we simply increased the availability, visibility, and awareness of the game.
They say they want all this good shit, but they don't do anything for it. I see this. There's a ton of effort put into this. Yeah, don't blame them on that part. But you know, those are greedy actions influenced by GameForged, and therefore it's their fault because they partnered with them. They started it, therefore they should be held accountable for that one. So fuck off,
been
man.
working on diligently for almost 4 years now. This could have been just a blanket statement and that they would have just gone to retail anyway, but I doubt they would have had the experience to do that, and I think with Gearbox it just made it a whole lot easier. It's quite clear that when they flew over to Dallas, they were shown all of the possibilities, and because of that not only increased the scope to make sure that it lives up to the AAA price tag, but also add a season pass and a $150 collector's box.
No game included. Are you kidding me? This...
with a whole bunch of We Happy Few merch. Of course, with the increased scope and adding more to the game, as a company, it's important to ensure a return on investment. Otherwise, they just wouldn't be around. But I truly wonder how this game would have turned out if they just stuck with the current scope and released it at the agreed price. Now, I know some people are going to point this out already, so I might as well mention it. These pinned Steam posts were essentially a way to quell and control the criticism towards this decision, because any other mention of it would have just been redirected to these posts. In regards to community management, I would understand if they made a pinned post addressing this, but silencing the outrage and condensing it to just 1 or 2 posts didn't really go down well with a lot of people. But either way,
especially gamers like we get enraged with these, man. Like if you do some shit like that, we are unrelentless. Oh, is that word?
hey, I'm sure you guys are very curious to see what happens
Relentless, sorry. Why unrelentless? I just unmade that word.
next, because oh boy was it a shit show. With an original launch date in April of 2018, things were delayed until August. There was an apology, and you know what, people didn't really mind so much. And although tedious, they did offer refunds for this delay. There was also the ban in Australia for the glorification of illegal substances, but anyway, holy crap did this game have a bad start. Upon playing the game, people noticed it was overly very unoptimized.
Unpolished.
A lot of issues with the graphics, with assets popping in here and there, NPCs defying the laws of physics, corrupted save files on an already really long game, multiple soft locks, the list goes on.
Imagine test the game before it releases. That could be a good start, I guess. Yeah, a closed beta where only a few hundred people partake in, so we can search for all the mistakes we have made. But just releasing it outright like this and hoping for good feedback, that's the worst thing you can do, man.
Now you see, what they did do right with this game is they got the vibe spot on. The voice acting was amazing. The story was pretty interesting, and I'm saying that from personal experience as well, because there are a few things with this game that I genuinely love. It's not the worst game ever. But minus all of the technical difficulties, what is actually wrong with this game? What actually went wrong with We Happy Few? Well, it's 2022 now. I've played through the whole game and a bit of
28.6 hours I went through the whole game. Like, this was worth $60.
DLC, and my experience could be described as drinking a slightly curdled milkshake. At first it tastes great, but once you see the curds, you quickly put it down. Although because this is my job, I couldn't. Smash like for milk. The story and the overall vibe is what really got me through this game. Like I've said before, the game is brilliantly voice acted, and the cutscenes are always something to look forward to. What I love is that you play as slightly above average people who none of which are heroes. Arthur, Sally, and Ollie all have done regrettable things, and all suffer from their own personal issues. They are essentially just another cog in the wheel trying to escape. Discovering the secrets behind Joy and also the government itself presents you with unexpected plot twists. However, with any open world game, the quests are what deliver the story and drive the
Wait, it was an entire open world game?
experience.
I'm just saying right now, this shit will never end well. Like, even in Elden Ring, where you couldn't do the open world Metroid or in Breath of the Wild, it's impossible to make a good open world game. Because if you think about open world games, is that, in my opinion, they should be that high of a standard where every encounter is unique, the dungeons are unique, where it's just too hard. They can be good open worlds, like an Elden Ring and Breath of the Wild, but I think it's nearly impossible to make a really well done, perfect open world game. You can't do that.
Quests in this game aren't all bad, but holy crap does it feel like a running sim at times. Because of the procedurally generated environments, a lot of locations will vary in distance. And to make things more confusing, the map
that's nice.
changes after each act. For example, there's this lab that you need to go to talk to Dr. Faraday. When I was playing as Arthur, she was located in the Garden District. When I was playing as Sally, she was just around the corner. And stuff like this breaks the immersion in a lot of ways. With these procedurally generated environments, sometimes you get lucky, but for me, I guess I wasn't, because I nearly gave up with the amount of pointless fetch quests and distance between them. My most horrific example is when
that just makes it more tedious and boring, I guess.
I had to do some quests for these low-grade witches. The quests themselves weren't all too bad, but for the love of God, why do I have to travel over 1 kilometer there and back 3 times? You want to know what the game feels like most of the time? This is it. Oh yeah, and not to
It's so drag out the game to get those hours in, isn't it?
mention when you're playing as Sally, you've got to look after a baby, and they took this quite literally, so you have to actually change the nappies and feed it, which of course makes sense, but if you don't do this, the debuff is incredible. The longer you spend not tending to this baby's needs, the more totems of neglect you get, and these essentially reduce your carry weight, which means you've got to drop stuff on the way, including important ingredients that you need for quests, and oh boy, wouldn't I be a terrible parent. So in between these quests, you've got to make it back home, you've got to sort out the baby, then you've got to go back out again. I mean, it's a great way to tell the story of Sally and to show how difficult it is being this woman in a world like this.
This would be the point where I would quit the game, and being honest, like this makes some story sense, yeah, but it's fucking boring.
Especially when everyone's out to try and get your baby. But
Tedious.
in regards to gameplay, it's just annoying. Even worse are the quests that require you to craft a specific item. For example, as Arthur, you have to create a boiler suit so you can act as a worker to pass this bridge. This took me bloody ages. I looked in every house I could to find as much raincoat fabric as possible. This wouldn't have been such an issue if everything didn't end up looking and feeling the same. All of the streets look copy and paste because of this procedural environment.
That's the thing with open world games, copy and paste shit.
So exploring whilst looking for specific ingredients becomes tiresome to say the least. I was so fed up with these quests that when I had to make a gas mask to cross yet another bridge, but this time as Ollie, I resorted to using a speedrunning strat. You see, straight after beating Act 1, I watched a speedrun to see how fast you can beat it, and in that speedrun there was a bridge exploit, where if you crouch and throw a bomb at the ground like so, you go flying and now you're on the bridge. Not all the quests are really that bad. The ones that were handcrafted where you sneak around are actually quite fun to explore. They don't actually feel too linear either, but they are unfortunately quite short-lived. And with these quests in particular, you can really see where compulsion games shine.
It gives me the vibe that there are like 3 to 4 hours of really good content in it, like with a good story. Nice shit, like, and the rest is just boring walking shit, like,
in their expertise. Combat in this game in a lot of ways is just clunky. It's pretty much a swinging match until the enemy goes to sleep. It wasn't the worst part about the game, and to be fair, it can be really satisfying, especially playing as Ollie. I mean, nothing beats just going around and bonking everybody in your way. Now, combat works like this. You swing, block, or push. You can also get some skills that allow you to wind up heavier attacks or block at the right time for some extra stamina. However, once you craft or more common...
It's a mechanic which doesn't really fit with a game which should be more story-based like this. It doesn't fit in.
Find an OP
like
weapon, you've pretty much won the game. Because even with some extra mechanics behind combat, it honestly is just swing, swing, swing until dead. But things do get interesting with throwables, like these sick bombs that I used on these doctors, and also nail bombs as well to finish them off. And not to mention these berserk darts or bombs that make NPCs fight each other, which made
that's nice.
for one of the freakiest situations I've had in this game.
Okay.
This is a stealth game whether it likes to admit it or not. I mean, the whole game is essentially about hiding in plain sight with the joy mechanic. But when sneaking around, I would often find myself sitting right next to an NPC who either has their FOV set to about 60 or is pretending not to see me in the hopes that I'll leave them alone. You can see footsteps of everybody nearby, even through walls, which makes things pretty easy. You can knock out enemies from behind, and I'm not sure if the NPCs are either too high to notice or they didn't do much with the AI, but I've never found a reason to hide any bodies as nobody seems to really care that much. They might get spooked, but I never found them trying to look around seeing if anybody was there.
Bro.
When you get caught, you've got 3 choices. One is to run away, 2 is that you run away and go into an alley or a room and hide, or 3, you climb. Because NPCs can't climb for some reason, and getting away is so easy that I started
Bro, it's instantly a zombie game. Like, if you just climb on something, you are totally safe. That's... When this is possible, you lost me at that point, man.
care less about being caught and more about getting to the next objective as fast as possible. When it comes to bugs in this game, even in 2022, I encountered a fair few. So let's start with the NPCs because they're my favorite. In the first mission where you infiltrate the base, I noticed that once the guards aggroed, they started to teleport all over the place. This happens a lot, but admittedly not as violently as this situation. Gravity appears to be more of a suggestion than anything else in this game. I'd frequently see people sitting like this, or even sleeping like this. And sometimes objects would also forget about physics, like these boxes right here, which is clearly not anything to actually do with box physics. This is just a design.
You need to create a game which is not really they don't really believe in the physics system, and most bugs are then truly features if you create a game without proper gravity in it. That would be nice, man.
Issue. Honestly, how the hell did they miss this? The clip at the beginning at this video had me in hysterics. It was a perfect example of what's wrong on a technical level with this game. Cutscenes don't seem to be safe either, because in this cutscene, when talking to a man in his house, a woman just walks into him and closes the door on me. When playing as Ollie, I also had a very chaotic cutscene. Dressed as a maid, I was running from the police as per usual. I hid behind a hill, which of course I could see through. Once they left, I took mushrooms for some reason and passed this joy detector in the hopes that it would think I was high enough. Of course that didn't work. The alarms went on and the security system was activated. But I quickly ran over to this officer and for some reason, I could still talk to him. So there's me tripping out, being zapped by the security system whilst talking to an officer behind shutters.
Let's go.
To top it all off, Ollie speaks to his imaginary deceased child, which actually has quite a sad story in the end. But this was probably the most chaotic experience I've had in a game since Noita, and I love it. These were just some of the bugs that I found in my nearly 30-hour playthrough.
Like, most aren't really fun bugs, so it just destroys the entire experience, man.
I didn't encounter anything game-breaking, and to be honest with you, most of them were quite funny. But things like buildings merging together, the
really
grass looking
like if it's constantly like that, I won't really find it funny, man.
Pretty weird. Some textures popping in perfectly whilst others are just really low res. There's all these other little things that make the game feel overall still quite unpolished, especially for the amount of time and money that went into this. Experiencing the game for myself made me realize that the issues with this game run deeper than any bug. It's the procedural environment with a linear story mashed on top of it that ruins the overall experience. With procedural environments comes repetitive interchangeable assets and locations. This means that exploring the world comes with a unique experience each time, but when you have a game like this that is driven mostly by its linear campaign,
Remove the stamina meter for running, and it would be 10 times better, I guess.
then the focus on what to do quickly skews towards that. When playing it for yourself, it'll become clear that this isn't a proper survival game with base building mechanics and a genuine reliance on food. Exploring and searching for resources is worthwhile, but it feels like you're going out of your way to find things that you would otherwise find in the campaign missions. With all of the waypoints to your next objective, it's clear that the game wants you to progress the story. Exploration should be one of the main focuses of an open world game, at least in my opinion. If you look at any free roam RPG, like let's say the classic New Vegas
New Vegas is one of the best ones. Like not nearly every new game which comes out, like I just can't believe it. They can't get better from the point of New Vegas. You know what I mean? Like, this is an old ass game. Why is this considered to be like really good? Because yeah, it truly is, but why do games get so bad? Like they put so much money into this new shit and put so much effort into it, but most of them are just complete garbage.
Been streaming over on Twitch. The world is relatively small, yet packed full of unique environments. You quickly learn that every plot of land is handcrafted, and with that, you as a player can expect that each location will be a unique experience. You don't get this with procedural environments as much. They rely heavily on interchangeable assets and locations. Once you've explored a couple of houses, you've pretty much seen them all. The player quickly learns that the most they'll find are either crafting ingredients, the odd letter, or if you're lucky, a side quest. In my playthrough, I would rarely run past a side quest or something of interest, but when I did, it was cool. But you see, in handcrafted maps, quests will typically take you through a predefined path. There will be things that you want to avoid or things that you want to explore. And because it's handcrafted, you already know that there's going to be more than just some cool weapons or new materials. Going from point A to B should be a part of the experience, not something you come to dread. Because in We Happy Few, I'd find myself trying to cut corners to get to the objective as fast as possible. I might see something in the distance, but then I'll think to myself, is it really worth it? Overall, the story shines above the gameplay. And unfortunately, at least for me, that's not enough to make it a fun game. Don't get me wrong, I did have fun at times, but I would say only 5 out of the 28 hours I played was genuinely enjoyable. The bugs that are around now are just funny encounters, but it does make the game feel unpolished. The gameplay quickly becomes bland and repetitive, but if you're committed, you'll get a lot of story to explore. Now, like I mentioned, I have played some of the DLC, and you can tell already that they've learned from their mistakes with the base game. They scrapped the survival mechanics and stuck with the great storytelling. I enjoyed the DLC more than the base game, and I only played a few hours of the first one. But unfortunately, you do require the full game to play it. I'd only really recommend this game on a very, very big discount. I think it costs way too much for what it is, at least the base game on its own. But if you want to play it for the DLC, then yeah, you're going to want to get this at a very low price.
Probably like worth $5, I guess.
Anyway, that's all I have to say about We Happy Few. It's been wicked, and I'd love to say a massive thanks to my new and existing Patreons. You guys are legit paying for all my milk supply.
That's nice. Go support him. Like this dude, this is a good content. He actually puts effort into his videos, not like me. I'm just reacting to shit and making first impression videos on video games, man. Like, if you want to see more reactions, I guess you can leave a like and subscribe. And that's actually it. See you next time. Wafer out.